Okay, I think we're now live, so let's get going.
Okay, thanks. Right, so welcome everybody to this exciting fishbowl debate about the future of energy. We're going to roam across all sorts of topics during the course of the next 90 minutes. We have 4 main chapters. I'll keep us to time and run through those chapters as we get to them. And we've got lots of different opportunities for people to speak. The idea behind a fishbowl event is that we'll always, after our intros, have an empty blue seat here in our inner circle, so that members of the audience can come up and be part of the conversation. And then somebody else has to leave the circle, and we have a really nice fluid sort of motion to the event and a really good conversation where as many people as possible get to take part. So that's the plan. As I say, I'll keep us to time, but I'm going to turn to Deborah and Patricia just to give us a quick introduction as to why we're here.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm just going to start by saying a little bit about what the Supergen programmes are, and then I think Patricia is going to introduce the session this afternoon. So the Supergens are funded by the UK Research Council, and they're programmes of research to look into Supergen, sustained and coordinated research, looking into sustainable energy generation and supply. And it covers all forms of new energy generation. So, for example, we have Supergens in bioenergy, in energy networks, energy storage, offshore renewable energy, and that includes offshore wind as well as wave and tidal energy, fuel cells, hydrogen, and wind and solar. And the aim of the programmes is to focus on community-led research. So it's really working very closely with the wide community of academics within the UK working in these areas, and to support the development and the acceleration of these new technologies for energy supply. Our role as Supergens is to provide that research leadership for UK research, and we interpret that as being about connecting people and inspiring people in their research. So we're connecting together the academics together with industry, who will translate the research into practice, and with policymakers, and also with the general public. And we work across disciplines, and we take a whole systems approach to our investigations into the development of new energy sources. So we're not just thinking about the technology, but we're also thinking about how they interact with the environment that they operate in, and also how they're going to be utilised by society. So we're working across disciplines. And as part of our programme, as well as connecting people together, we're looking to make sure that the workforce is sustainable. So we each have programmes of research or programmes of activity to support our early career researchers and people who are fresh into their careers, looking to be inspired into working into these areas. And we also have a focus on equality, diversity and inclusion to make sure that we are supporting underrepresented groups to join and to get involved in the energy sector more generally. So I'll hand over to Patricia now.
Okay, so you've just heard how important it is to us to connect with industry, policy and the wider community. So we're better to be than Glasgow this week on Energy Day at COP26. Most of us have been over at the Green Zone this morning. We have seen the huge enthusiasm that there is across a whole range of people with widely differing views of what our energy future should look like. And we wanted to put this event on today to try and capture some of those different perspectives in the round here, but also so that we recorded it, we're live streaming it, but that we have a record today at least of what the mood's like in the room, COP26, what are people doing? Are we doing enough? Does the energy system look like it's evolving in the direction that we really want it to be heading? So I'm really looking forward to this. We've been planning this for such a long time, and yeah, hoping that we get some really good perspectives today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Patricia. Great.
To swap places with Tony.
We do, Deborah, if that's all right. Brilliant. And I realised I should have introduced myself. My name is Steve Connor, and I'm the facilitator. I got straight into how we run a fishbowl without telling you my name. How rude. Okay, so now we're going to have a brief, I'm saying brief, I'm looking you in the eye, a brief introduction to those 6 hubs that you just heard about. So what I'm going to suggest, Patricia, if you could start with bioenergy, and then when you're done, if you wouldn't mind swapping with Sam, and we'll go full circle and come back to you. So Patricia,
sure. Not often that bioenergy gets to go first, but here we go.
It's the little victories.
It is. So bioenergy is about taking CO2 that's in the atmosphere, turning it into plants and trees, they're there naturally, and then taking that and turning it into things that are useful. A lot of that can be energy, but we can also turn this into products. We have, in the form of trees and plants, the only renewable carbon atoms on the planet. And we've got to be really careful about how we use those. As we move towards 2050, that means being even more careful than we are today. And I really see bioenergy as a management exercise in shepherding carbon atoms out of there, down to here, and then working out what useful things we can do with them. It's also the only renewable which is inherently storable that we have in good supply in the UK. And it is absolutely fascinating because it has such a wide variety of interactions with land, with air, with people, all the way along that supply chain. So it's hugely controversial, it's hugely interesting, and we love working on it.
So my name is Sarah Walker and I am from the Energy Networks Hub. We're aiming to help deliver a just transition to net zero. And in terms of the work that we're looking at, we've been talking to our community and we've run some workshops, and I've got some key challenges to share with you that the community have identified. So on the technical challenges for networks, the electrification of heat and transport means that new technologies will be connecting to the network, and some technical solutions are very early days, so we're not quite sure how they're going to interact. But we certainly expect that network architecture of the future will be more complicated. In terms of social challenges, we've identified the need for the disadvantaged to be part of the decision space. It's very important to have inclusive, accessible messaging about just transitions and about the role of networks, and to think about the burden of cost, who it falls on. And on the market side, if we've got lots of renewables, lots of heat pumps, that's potentially lots more organisations and individuals wanting to be part of markets, and markets have not been designed or set up to enable millions of participants. So market change for networks in the future, and who leads on that is not clear. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Sian Dutton and I'm here representing the Energy Storage Plus Supergen. So as Patricia has already hinted, as we move to renewable energies, we also need to think about how we store the energy so that we can use it when we want, not when it's generated. And so as part of that, we need to think about how we store it. And this could be electrochemical energy storage, such as batteries or supercapacitors, or it could be larger scale applications such as compressed air, liquid air, or flywheels. And so within our network, we're thinking about how do we do that? How does that integrate within the network with different types of renewable energies across both small and local scales, wider scales?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Henry Jeffrey from the University of Edinburgh, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Offshore Renewable Energy Supergen, led by Deborah, that we've heard from earlier. I'd just like to start by giving some context, and the context I'm going to give is that the IEA roadmap for meeting net zero by 2050 showed quite clearly that we can meet the 2030 targets with technologies that exist, but we really need emerging technologies to be developed to meet that gap between 2030 and 2050. And all of the technologies that we're hearing about today are meeting that role, so it really shows the importance of the Supergen programme in delivering net zero overall. One of those technologies, of course, is offshore renewable energy. With those unfamiliar, that's floating offshore wind, wave and tidal energy that we focus on within the Supergen programme. And within the Supergen programme, we've done analysis in collaboration with the IEA that with the right policies in place at the right time, we will be able to deliver a quarter of the UK energy mix by 2050 from offshore renewables, as well as delivering nearly 80 billion to the UK economy. So that means that offshore renewable energy not only plays an important part in delivering net zero, it plays a really important part in delivering the just transition with those high quality jobs, literally empowering communities, as well as playing a role in balancing the overall network that we heard earlier is so important. So the UK is a leader in offshore renewable energy. We need to maintain that lead. We heard at the beginning of this week from Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng about the importance that we need to have on domestic sovereign technology and reduce their reliance on overseas supply. And I think all of the technologies that we hear about today are able to play a real role in doing that.
Hello, I'm Tony Ruscoli from Durham University, and I'm to talk to you about hydrogen. So, hydrogen has had many false dawns. I've been working in hydrogen for about 30 years now, and it's now actually moving from an increasing momentum phase into implementation and demonstration phase. There's IEA Global Hydrogen Review that's recently come out, which actually indicates a six-fold increase in the demand for hydrogen. Those that are working in hydrogen, they really see that there are three challenges, and it's demand, demand, and demand. We need to actually increase the opportunity for the utilization of hydrogen. There's set to be a massive increase in demand from the decarbonization of industrial clusters, and also an increasing demand in transport that's linked to clusters, because within those clusters, primarily that's where hydrogen is going to be produced. There you have that interaction with freight movement and shipping, and so therefore there will be this transition over to linking those sectors together. And also in the power generation side of things, in terms of providing dispatchable power, hydrogen is seen as a very good long-term storage of energy, and therefore we can offset the intermittency of offshore wind, renewables like PV as well. But also then to balance the seasonal demand between supply and demand. So to say that the main challenge now is to build up the demand and also build up the supply of low carbon hydrogen. So that's hydrogen from electrolysis of water, green hydrogen, but also blue hydrogen from a point of view of reforming natural gas and integrating that with carbon capture and storage.
Thanks, great introduction. Finally,
Hi,
Sam.
yeah, so I'm Sam Shanks from the University of Cambridge, and I'm representing the Super Solar Hub here. And so we just heard the International Energy Agency has put out their report in May saying that by 2050 we're going to need around almost three-quarters of our power supply would be from renewables, and solar would be playing a major role in that. And it's a very exciting time for solar, because we've seen the cost of solar photovoltaics in particular drop in price. The cost of electricity from solar has dropped by a factor of 100 since 1980, and another factor of 10 since in the last decade. That's really, really exciting. We now have close to a terawatt of solar photovoltaics deployed globally, and that's fantastic. But the reality is we need to be deploying around a terawatt per year, at least by the end of the decade. So we're going to need a huge ramp up of how much solar there is. And the current technology, which is silicon, is going to take us a long way there, but it won't take us the whole way there. We need new technologies, new materials to support this and to really roll us out towards the terawatt per year level that we need. So in terms of the Super Solar Hub, the work that goes on, there's a lot of work going on to reduce the cost of silicons, the current technology. There's also a lot of work in developing new technologies, new materials, such as halide perovskites and thin film photovoltaics, which can be a lot cheaper and deployed in different ways as well than the traditional solar. And there's also a lot of work in characterizing the stability, longevity of these cells, and also systems approaches to solar.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. Wonderful. Great. So we've had our introductions to the 6 hubs, and now we're going to go into actually having our substantive debate. I'll run through the chapters we're going to cover over the course of the next hour and a quarter now, and then just so you can have a think, and that's 2 of you to leave, if that's all right. So we're going to cover 4 main chapters of this conversation. I'm conscious of behind this one. The first chapter is coming back to what we've literally just started with, which is how do we generate energy in a net zero world? What should the mix be? And what are some of the challenges, advantages, disadvantages, and all of that. So that'll be chapter 1. Then we're going to move on to how do we deliver that energy mix to the public? And what are the implications there? And that might be everything from some of the stuff that Sarah was talking about, a just transition, through to acceptability, feelings of control over energy, all that sort of stuff. So that's chapter 2. Chapter 3 of our conversation is going to be about the utilisation of that energy. How do we use it? And what are the implications? What do we need to think through? Are there any priority sectors that we should really get to earlier? And Tony, in terms of hydrogen, you were starting to pick up on some of that there. And then our final chapter for the conversation is, what does the UK need to do to make this net zero energy system happen? That's both obviously major systemic changes, but also anything that impinges on policy as well. So our final bit of the conversation is, it's a cheesy thing, it's a big helicopter view, it's how do we make this actually happen? So that will be the final sort of concluding chapter. So those are the 4 bits we're going to run through. But in order to make this fluid start, I'm going to ask for 2 volunteers from the inner circle. Who feels? Tony, you're a good man. Sean, thank you. So we've got 2 empty seats. So I'm going to ask 1 member of the audience to join us in the inner circle as we talk about energy generation. So who can I call upon? I might actually just swivel right around and ask you what goes on. So we've got our 4 initial speakers. I'm going to kick us off and just ask us to start this conversation. But the rules are, if any of you want to join the conversation, or if any of our speakers say something that you'd like to respond to, rather than hands in the air, or wait for a Q&A session, or somebody to come around with a roving mic, I need you to sit in that chair over there, okay? And you can do that literally just after we've started. So the chair is open. The only rule is, if somebody sits down in that chair, I need somebody from the inner circle to leave. Okay, fabulous. So our first chapter for this conversation, and Martin, maybe on you might like to start with actually, is how do we generate energy in our net zero world? And the 4 prompts I've got in that are obviously, what mix of sources should we be talking about? What should we dial up, dial down? Are there any disadvantages or advantages that we really want to highlight in that mix? And the issue of storage is in this this sort of generation piece, and how do we store energy? So we might want to come back to that. And is there anything we really want to dial up? Do we want to grasp Patricia's challenge and make more bioenergy in the mix? And some of you might want to jump in on that. So if you want to kick us off, Martin, can we start with you? What's your view on this? What should the generation
Well, I mean, I represent the Renewable Energy Association, and ever since we started that, we've been looking across a range of technologies. And in fact, really to begin with, we were focused on the development of those technologies. Now we're interested in not specifically those, but in how you solve the problems of getting it into the market. So it's moved from the issues of technology to the barriers that exist to getting it in. As far as how are we going to generate the energy, then the reality is renewable energy is by definition distributed, and therefore it must be a distributed system that applies the most appropriate technology for a given area, given climate, given set of circumstances. So to come out and say it's got to be solar or it's got to be offshore wind is not, in our view, necessarily the right way to do it. It is about thinking about exactly where you are and what you're going to generate. Alongside that is the fact that probably more than we have done before, we need the interconnectedness, because we're going to start looking at not only what happens in the UK and various regions of the UK, we are going to have to shift energy from areas where it's generated at a particular time, and you may have big shifts between countries or regional use. So way back we were looking at a European supergrid. That sort of thing is going to be necessary to make it happen. And then of course the final thing, which in many respects I think we've been too slow on, is storage. And the storage is not just about batteries. In fact, we're creating, if we concentrate on nothing but lithium, because it happens to be the technology that's there at the moment, then you can argue that that is not really the right answer for grid scale, because we need the high energy density that you have within lithium with for electric vehicles, etc. So again, it's going to be a case of pulling on the various technologies there, being much more granular in what's appropriate in different places, and supporting those solutions and bringing them into the web. I suppose overall, if you think of the energy system, the transition that is occurring now is very similar to the transition that occurred in the communications and data comms. Way back, we're going from very monolithic approach, which is big power stations and lots of people sucking on it, to much more of a web. And that's where we're heading. And I think the business models will start to do that as well. But anyway, so I haven't answered it in the sense of, here's your one answer. There is not an answer. That's the approach.
It's a wide mix to the right technology, right place, right time. Exactly. Who wants to come in on that from our inner circle? Does anybody want to join? Please do.
I'll come in on that maybe. So looking at the northeast, which is where I'm based, about 20% of our emissions are from electricity, about 40% from transport, and 40% from domestic and industrial, all those things lumped together. And so sometimes we talk quite a bit about where should the energy for the electricity system come from, but we need to remember how much of our energy is actually in the form of fossil fuel for various forms of heating in the home or heating for industrial processes. And so the energy currently for that is a lot of fossil fuels, it's oil and it's natural gas, and we need to move away from those carbon-based fuels and find alternatives. So alternatives like biofuels, alternatives like hydrogen, alternatives like electrification of some of those heating loads is really important. And of course, that then changes the nature of what we need for storage and what we need for networks. And the service that the end user gets potentially is different as well. So it's all interlinked. When we talk about how is energy going to be made, decisions there affect how energy gets moved and how energy gets used.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. We've got a new participant. Do you want to tell us your name?
Hi, I'm James Nash from the University of Strathclyde. I'm doing a PhD in wind. I've kind of been thinking over the past few months about something, and it's more that we've essentially always had storage, and we've always used storage for a long period of time, just in the form of chemical fossil fuels in our vehicles. And if we're going to transition to electric vehicles and electrifying the system, we're probably always going to have those vehicles connected to the grid in some form or another, or for the majority of the time that they're in anybody's possession. You know, you're going to go home and you're going to plug your car in, it's going to charge overnight. And so with the demand curve, you have this big peak when everybody comes home and they put their kettles on, they make a cup of tea and they get in. And if they have their vehicle full of energy, which it likely will have been because they likely won't have been driving throughout the day, then you have in itself an energy storage consistently for a lot of the time. And if you have distributed systems like solar on company roofs or individuals' houses, then you don't have to deal with a lot of the transmission issues, because it's the generation is often located where the storage is, and the storage is then moved to the location where the individual uses that power. So you don't end up with a lot of these issues. And that's just, I guess that's something I've been thinking about recently. I think it's an opportunity.
Thanks, James.
And I guess, sorry, just lastly, I also wanted to say, I think one of the other issues that we have with lithium-ion is that it doesn't deal that well with high cycling rates. I mean, it's getting better, but I feel like one of the kind of issues that we're going to have to deal with is the fact that we probably need to find a different battery, or at least make lithium better. So yeah, that's
Thanks, James. Brilliant.
Can I pick up on that?
Sam,
Yeah, so I mean, I absolutely agree that electric vehicles are a very good storage mechanism. I think that the other issue with the UK is with renewables is, of course, you know, we have, for example, for solar, there's a huge discrepancy in when we generate the sun across the year and also across the day. One of the really interesting things I think for solar is thinking about putting them into electric vehicles, actually on the roof reusable electric vehicles and actually using them to generate, while the cars are out, you can boost the range and in fact fully charge the vehicle in this way. And this is something that some of the new materials can enable, the lighter weight and high performance materials. And there's a lot of interest actually from car manufacturers as well, electric vehicle manufacturers for them. So I think that's a paradigm shift in how we think about solar rather than just thinking about it as a plug-in solution. It can also be more dynamic.
Thanks, Sean. Excellent. Tony, you've rejoined us.
Yeah, so I thought it'd be remiss not to point out that you don't generate energy, you convert it. But it was linking to the point about vehicle to grid, for example, as a form of storage. That won't solve the seasonal storage issue and this disparity between summer and winter. We need solutions for long-term storage. Hydrogen can play a particular role in that area. So that's really
great. One question from me for everybody, while I'm starting, closing on.
Andy Matt, I look after the carbon management team at Glasgow City Council.
Good to meet you. One question for me is, because we are in a climate emergency and rapid decarbonisation is, right at the forefront of everybody's minds as quickly as possible. In terms of the generation of energy, is there any trick we're missing? Is there anything that we need to be making more of? Are we focused in the right areas? That's one thought that I had. But Andy, you've joined the circle. What do you want to say?
Just pick up a couple of previous points. We're doing a vehicle to grid trial at our offices just across the road here in George Street. So happy to talk about that if you like. I'm a big fan of solar because it's predictable and reliable even in the UK, but it has to be part of a wide range of mix. And the kind of locality and seasonality of renewables means that it's one of a number of technologies we have to consider. On windy days we get wind, but on sunny days we get sun, but the two aren't always going to operate at the same time. So that energy mix is important. But one of the things we haven't talked about yet, and this is one of the both barriers and opportunities, is the role that people play. Like never before, people are going to have to be educated in where their energy comes from and how they use their energy. So that seasonality and those sort of day-to-day variances of energy is something that are things that people are going to have to be cognizant of. If it's a very windy day, that's the time to charge the vehicle or run the washing machine or whatever it may be. So whatever system we employ, the fact that it's not going to be a linear system like we currently have, mean that the consumer is going to have to be far more aware than ever before. And that's a huge issue because, generally speaking, we're ignorant. We're ignorant of the issues and we're ignorant of opportunities as a general populace. But I think that's a real opportunity if we can start getting that information out. And that begins to mitigate the need for so much storage. If we can change people's behaviors, change when they do and how they do things, that significantly mitigates how much reliance we have on energy storage.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. That's a really good contribution. I'll let Deborah come in first and then I'll come to you, Ten. Andy's vacated quick.
Thank you. I don't think I introduced myself. So I'm Deborah Greaves, Professor of Ocean Engineering at the University of Plymouth and leading the Supergen Offshore Energy Hub. But I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. First of all, I think using renewable energy really does connect us much better as people to where our energy comes from our electricity comes from. But that's not new. So we've recently got solar panels, PV on our house, and so we do our washing when it's sunny. But we've always done our washing when it's sunny because we hang it out to dry when it's sunny. So we've always had a connection with that. And so I think it's just reinforcing that with our renewables. And the other thing about renewables is they are naturally variable, of course, as we've heard. So we need to think about long-term storage for seasonal effects, but also shorter-term storage and whether that's storage in the car or other battery storage or other solutions works as well. But the other thing is that we need to have an energy mix, a renewable energy mix. So that's why it's so valuable to have solar and wind, and have wind and tidal stream and wave energy, which are emerging new technologies which haven't got to the same stage, but we need to keep them in the mix because by 2050 we can get some natural balancing occurring through the variability, the different variability of each of those sources.
Thanks, Deb. Brilliant. Tony, I'm going to come to you,
Yeah.
and then I'll introduce our two new participants. Actually.
It was just a quick
Thanks,
point
Ken.
in that I have an electric vehicle that has the capability to do vehicle to grid. My provider provides that opportunity. And it's kind of this thing about where you get the public involved and having that confidence. I mean, there's still range anxiety with electric vehicles, but when you're actually sharing your storage with somebody else and you've got limited control over that, that's going to be quite a hard thing to get over. It's okay for somebody that's like me working in the energy sector, but for the general public, I think that's going to be it's got to be a lot of education around that.
Great. I'm going to keep some, thank you so much, Tony. I'm going to keep some the general public in a second. We've got 3 new people. This is even more exciting fishbowl than I thought it was going to be. So let's start with, well, let's do names first and then we'll kick off. So you are?
I'm Luke Cullen. I'm studying resource efficiency at University of Cambridge.
Hi, Luke. Thanks.
Jonathan Scurlock. I'm Chief Advisor on Renewable Energy with the National Farmers Union, but I'm a former academic in energy policy.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Beverly Gower-Jones, I'm Managing Partner of the Clean Growth Fund.
Great, so 3 new participants. I think perhaps I'll start with you, Luke, and then we'll...
I just wanted to mainly pick up on the point made before about people's participation in all this. So we're very much focusing on developing new technologies in terms of energy generation. So I work a lot to do with implementing AI in terms of climate change mitigation and how that is important in terms of resource efficiency. And therefore, I just wanted to emphasize the importance of developing new technologies for generation alongside technologies for efficiency, essentially, in how we go about using that technology. And therefore, very much thinking about, okay, solar is generating more when the sun is shining, we have wind, and how that interacts with storage throughout the energy grid. I just wanted to emphasize the importance of using the technologies becoming available more and more through the Internet of Things, as we have more measurements throughout our homes and throughout the grids. I just wanted to open up that side of the discussion on the demand side, as well as the supply side of the energy problem.
Yeah, I've got a really geeky interest in the Internet of Things, so I'm so glad you said that. Beverly, can I come to you first and then over to you, John?
Sure, it just struck me that it was difficult to have this conversation without mentioning nuclear.
Yeah.
It's a complete net zero energy source, especially with the web that Martin talked about in terms of distributed energy. And of course, it has a kind of consistent base load, which we don't always get with solar and wind. So I just felt as I was sitting listening that I couldn't let that pass without, talking about nuclear fusion and also small modular reactors and the role that, that they are needed and will play in our kind of energy mix going forwards.
And just while we've got you, because we've got 35 minutes in and nuclear's only just popped up, just unpack small modular reactors a little bit more for us, because not all of us will be aware of that technology. So.
Sure. So it's my actual background is in terms of financing technologies rather than any kind of particular specialism in in any one technology such as like nuclear. But small modular reactors would have a kind of a 7-year or so payback. They're kind of due to be available in the next 3 or 4 years, as I understand it. And would be able to contribute to the energy generation at distributed places for heavy industry and for cities and so on, and so therefore be kind of widely dispersed rather than the large kind of reactors that you see at Sizewell or wherever.
Yeah. Thanks, brilliant. There were quite a few heads nodding vigorously when you jumped in, so if anybody wants to join in on that, please do. Jonathan.
So, yeah, I have a sort of helicopter view of energy policy, and I'm absolutely fascinated by this conversation. I think what's really interesting is we start seeing the different new energy options starting to bump up against one another and a certain amount of fungibility. Patricia talked about fungibility, I think, earlier, introducing bioenergy because it is potentially easily fungible with many of the fossil fuels that we're trying to replace. But we've also got all sorts of interesting things that have come up in discussion about long-term, short-term storage. And if we're going to have electrolytic hydrogen, do we just leave it as hydrogen and make use of it as hydrogen, or can we turn it into other kinds of clever small molecules, ammonia, synthetic methane and things like that, which then start to be fungible with other things that may come from bioenergy, and perhaps actually help if you're trying to create new kinds of long-distance transportation chains around the world. But then you come to something like solar, and people like Twiggy Forrest at Fortescue Industries, who's got people handing out publicity here outside Queen Street station. This massive project in Northern Australia, which is going to be exporting electricity through 4,000 kilometres into Singapore. We've got a British version of that as well, called X-Links, which is meant to be in southern Morocco and sending seasonally storable power into a grid injection point in Devon, near Barnstaple, without going through the European supergrid. It will have its own private wire, as it were, 3,000 kilometres long. So, there's so many possibilities bubbling up at the moment, all jostling with one another. And actually what people out there are saying is that there's lots of money available. We just need to know where to invest it.
Yeah.
So we can have a conversation about that and try and direct how we build this new sustainable economy, which is going to have perhaps many fewer of the disadvantages of the old economy.
Fascinating. Yeah, I haven't even thought about that. That whole jostling idea is really powerful. Henry, you had your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to come in on, those are all really interesting topics, and starting with, I'm really glad you mentioned about the artificial intelligence, because I think those types of technologies make us better at everything that we do, irrespective of which technology that we're dealing with, whether it be in the wave and tidal sector or offshore wind sector, where you're trying to then sort of predict your resource assessment, or whether it be in the demand sector, predicting how the consumer is going to behave. Everything makes this more efficient and more effective in making this a more affordable transition and a more just transition. I'm also glad that you mentioned nuclear, because irrespective of any of the future energy mixes that we look at predicted by the national grid, irrespective of how high renewables they all have nuclear within them, with different levels of new nuclear that are there. Which then brings me back to our previous statement about sort of how we deliver this, and whether it be the storage that we heard from Martin, or in the electric vehicles that we also heard about. That is a very sort of that's at the localized level that is needed to make everything more resilient and more well balanced. But also, as Deborah was saying, is about sort of the overall energy mix being well balanced, and so making sure that you have wave and tidal offsetting the seasonal distribution of solar to make everything much better. And then when it comes to the overall policies about what we invest in, it's a really big decision for UK energy policymakers, but it is a decision that needs to be made, and it needs to be made in a balanced way between economic policy to what delivers a just transition and makes this affordable and has high quality jobs, while delivering energy policy at the least cost to the consumer. And both of those things need to be balanced together.
Anyone, you're speaking, and anybody else, please feel free to join on this. I did want to, we've mentioned the role of the public a couple of times, and one of the topics I wanted to get into that you've just touched on, I thought you could perhaps kick us off in the next chapter of this conversation, is that just transition, and making sure that when it comes to delivering a net zero energy system to the public, we don't somehow penalise, for example, lower income households. Thank you, Betsy. So have you got any thoughts on that? And then I'm going to ask you to leave, so.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I'll be really honest.
Absolutely, I do, and absolutely, I will. I think it's it's building on the statement that I just made. It's delivering, sort of energy policy at least cost to the consumer.
Yeah.
Doing the right thing for the least cost energy system, while at the same time doing the right thing for the overall UK economy. So making sure that there are high quality jobs associated with this. And so the decisions that the policymaker needs to make, and they do need to be made between between BECCS, and they need to be made between Treasury, and there needs to be a balance between the two, recognising that you need to deliver net zero, but at the same time delivering the just transition. And I don't think that you'll do both of those things in isolation. There needs to be decisions made to sort of pick winners. And government doesn't have a problem with picking winners, but they have a problem with picking losers. And so making that really difficult decision is, I think, the overall challenge. To deliver energy policy and deliver the just transition need to be linked together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, brilliant. Jonathan, I'll come to you, and then we've got a new participant, so I'll come to you next. And then
yeah, so look, very much on that point, it's partly in response to the point you were making earlier about engaging with consumers. Government is trying to make some decisions about, do we go for heat pumps or do we go for hydrogen for home heating? And neither is particularly perfect solution. And one of the big problems is, look at this from the point of view of the relatively poor householder who feels that, well, I'm going to be told to junk my gas boiler, maybe not directly, because the Prime Minister says it will always be a choice that you can make, but heavily pressured to swap it out and put in a heat pump instead. And yet I know plenty of people you can find online and so on who will say, I'm sorry, in lots of houses heat pumps don't work. We've got Caroline Lucas saying we're all in leaky teapots. Unless we can stop the teapots from leaking, then we can't have heat pumps. And what are we going to do instead of that? We're going to have hydrogen 100% in domestic households. I'm sorry, I'm very worried about that, because I think it could be very bad for the deployment of hydrogen elsewhere in the economy if there were domestic accidents.
Thanks, John. Brilliant.
Retire at that point.
No, thank you. And thank you for leaky teapots. I live in one of those. I certainly identify with it. Right, I'm going to scoot around everybody in just a second, but you've not spoken before. Do you want to give your name?
Yeah, I'm Callum Watkins, and I'm representing Glasgow Community Energy today. So from the kind of just transition perspective, thinking about different actors and people who can participate in the energy system. So we're all about democratizing energy. And because it's becoming more distributed anyway, more people are acting. I mean, I think we talked about millions of people are going to be involved in the energy system. How do we educate people? How do we tell them about why it's important? Maybe, as Andy was saying, we'll put it in like weather forecasts. Every morning you'll say, right, here's what the weather's going to be. Here's what you should do with your energy. And we want to be kind of part of that process and enabling people to really understand where their energy comes from, to own it, to be voting and deciding with their money and with their voice on how to use that energy. So I'm quite excited about this part of the discussion about delivery.
Brilliant. I love that. Part of the weather forecast, just like, We're back to Deborah saying, do your washing today. It's a really good day for washing. Fantastic, that's a lovely country. Sarah, I'll come to you and then I'll come back to Martin and Andy.
Okay, I'll try and, there's a few points to pick up on, so I'll try and remember them all. One is, there's a Twitter field called the baking forecast, and it will tell you when to bake based on how much renewables is on the system. The second one is, impact on individuals isn't always a cost impact. So when we think about, for example, investment in networks and where the networks are going to go and how that's going to be paid for, sometimes the impact is not on the community from a cost point of view, but an impact on their landscape, their social amenity. And so there are things other than cost when we think about a just transition. Just putting that out there. And leaky teapots can be heated by anything. It's just not an efficient way to heat a leaky teapot. So heat pumps do work in leaky teapots, and so do gas boilers, and so do hydrogen boilers. But it's better to insulate your leaky teapot first.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. I should have said I have a leaky teapot with a heat pump. I'll come to you, Martin, if that's okay.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about the just transition now, and I think we're reaching a real inflection point with that, because to date, most of the rejigging the energy system has been done at the big project level. So it's been about leveraging large amounts of capital into those through mechanisms which are understood by the players that understand it. And now we've got to, there are two particular things which you're going to need the consumer to do it, and the consumer becomes a prosumer. First is heat, and the second is transport. And the issue for them is, how do you get that to happen without it being regressive? So there is a need to find the capital or to create policy and business models which will bring it in. Because at the moment, if you look, just take transport. The only people who can afford the electric cars are those who are probably sitting in this sort of room. They're educated, they've got reasonable incomes, and they can do it. But we need everybody to have electric cars. And what's going to happen quite quickly is that the old fossil fuel cars are going to go into the second-hand market where the C's and D's can afford it, and then they're going to be suffering rising prices and increasingly draconian taxes on it. And so you're going to get regressive policies, which are supposedly the carrot and stick, but these people don't have the capital for it. So we're now facing this head on because you're moving away from the big projects. And I think it's going to be a crucial thing to get right if, A, we're going to get the speed in this, and B, you do not exacerbate sentiment of inequality of the world.
Thanks, Martin. That was really helpful contribution. Andy?
I just want to really emphasize a couple of points that have been made there recently about our primary objective should always be to reduce how much we're consuming. So the efficiency of our homes, when we choose to travel and how we choose to travel, that should always, in the hierarchy of things, be the first thing. If our homes are more efficient, we don't need as much heat, we don't need as much energy. So just like to really emphasize that point. I appreciate this is a conversation about generation, but we need less generation if we're more efficient in the first place.
No.
My real point is on the markets and the pricing and these kind of things. So I'll give you an example. Many of our electricity bills are mostly made up of through costs. 60 to 70% of our electricity bills are fixed standing charges, not even related to consumption. You can never switch on the light and you're still paying these standing charges. So there really has to be a reversal in the way we charge people and make people pay for their energy. So if you are transitioning from a gas boiler, for example, to a heat pump, great, it's good for the environment. It is one of the things we should be aspiring to. That places increased financial pressure on the consumer because of the cost of electricity and the way that those electricity markets are structured in the form of through charges and taxes and so forth. So we really need government intervention on that. And, do we more heavily tax gas? It's a really problematic thing. Do we subsidize electricity? Do we place more pressure on generators and suppliers? I don't know the answer to that, but just a point about the cost of the relative fuels.
Coming on heat pumps, just picking up that point. The problem you've got is a heat pump in winter, at best, is going to will have a coefficient of performance of 3. And when you have a difference between the cost of gas and the cost of electricity, which is about the same, then you spend all this money to put the heat pump in, but you get no benefit from the running costs. And that's what people are seeing. So there is a huge need to sort out that market.
Then we come back to it, time of use and these kind of things. So it's a very, very complicated thing. Apologies.
No, that's fine. Brilliant. Oh, thanks for vacating.
Yeah, so I think a lot of these issues kind of come down to, like the last speakers have said, efficiency, and I think a lot of it is actually policy. I mean, I think that we're in a situation now, and this is kind of what happened with solar a long time ago, where installing things like heat pumps are too expensive for the consumer. So back in 2010, we subsidized solar, and what happened? The cost came down. And I think that really we're kind of in the same position with a lot of these like newer technologies that are emerging, and I guess to go on to energy generation, it's the same with tidal. And I think that we really have an issue in really just the way that we're governed, because it doesn't really seem like the government wants to, and I don't want to say it's political, but it doesn't seem like there is the kind of appetite for subsidization in order to reduce costs. And I think that's really the only way that this is going to happen. So I think really we need to subsidize the costs and develop the technology better so that we can actually mass produce the systems and allow mass implementation, because I just don't see it happening any other way. And it's the only way to prevent it from not becoming draconian, like the last speaker said, because at the end of the day, it's the average person that you want to install this, not just the wealthy. And if something is 5 times the cost of a boiler, 6 times the cost of a boiler, how can anybody expect to ever purchase that? like, I mean, of the normal, average person, no one is going to do it, and that's the issue that we're at. I mean, even if the running costs are lower, it's just not gonna work.
Great, thanks for that. I'm going to come back to, and Andy, come back. I don't know where he's coming behind me. Come back to pricing as well when we do a wrap up about the UK system. Briefly, Sarah, before I come back to you, Tony, I've noticed you're keen to come in. There's so many hydrogen references, and you've been really good just sort of sat there. So did you want to pick up on any of that? Because you said you had a couple of points you wanted to contribute on.
No, I'd covered all of those.
Oh,
the baking forecast and the leaky teapot, and the other impacts than just cost on the consumer. But I think those cost points are really important for us to think about, because the danger is that policy mechanisms can disproportionately affect the people who are least able to pay.
While I've got you, Sarah, before I come to Tony, one of the other bits, I'm going to move us on now to a discussion, just so everybody's ready, around utilisation and any places where we want to prioritise sectors that are really energy hungry that we need to focus on, because we've not quite touched on that yet, and I'd like us to come back to that. But one of the areas in this bit of the conversation we want to cover was jobs and skills and opportunities. We've not really talked about that at all, and you're nodding great, so I'll come to you in a sec. But I know each of the hubs has got that as one of the sort of set agenda points, haven't they? So I just wondered, we haven't quite discussed the sort of opportunities that cascade out of this transition. Have you got any thoughts on that?
So from a networks point of view, I think the skills and development areas for us that we're looking at are around how the different bits of our energy systems could be more coordinated and work more collaboratively, and to have some crossover skills so that people in the gas sector understand a bit better what the electricity sector might need from it, and vice versa, and the same if it's the bioenergy sector or the solar community, to have some kind of crossover and better understanding across the different technology types, the different parts of the energy sector, so that we're a bit more integrated and talking the same language.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to say from another point about ownership, that not everyone needs to own an electric car. I think there's a real desire for shared ownership models, where actually we start pooling things together. We start looking at, actually let's have people investing in a larger scheme that can benefit more people, but doesn't mean that our car is sitting outside our house most of the time, that it's actually being used by lots of people. And I think the value that can come out of community projects is often more proportionally focused on marginal and vulnerable communities than, say, the feed-in tariff, which supported people who could afford to pay for large installations on their own homes. So I think there's an opportunity there for, when we collectively bring people together, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can put something very small in and actually become part of that, and you have an ownership in that system. And that's going to be an educational tool as well, because people think, I own this thing. We've put some panels on roofs in Glasgow. You wouldn't believe it rains so much here, but they work and they generate money for the communities. And then we go and start employing people, and we employ people, and we develop skills, and we educate people. We use that as a kind of method and tool for doing that.
Brilliant, thanks for that. Tony.
I guess a few points. I was going to ask you how much you paid for your heat pump.
It's live on YouTube.
I've gone down that route to have a look at that, and it was extortion, and that was before I actually thought about my leaky teapot. The opportunity for that, and I was kind of picking up on the point about this subsidising PV. I think it's a little bit naive to think that our UK policy massively incentivized China to mass produce PV. That's where the cost reduction has come, not just from a policy within the UK. And actually you can, I think Sarah's point really as well, you can have unintended consequences. I'm really not happy with some of our most productive farming land in the UK covered in PV. I think there are other ways that you can actually use PV in a really sensible way and not put it on productive farmland.
Feel the National Farmers Union behind
I might want to come on your way.
Hang on just a second. So, give us a moment. So, Deborah, you were next.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to say, picking up the point about the skills and the transition, and also I think on economic levelling up, then there's a really strong synergy for offshore renewables with offshore oil and gas and transitioning away from oil and gas technologies. Those skills and that the infrastructure and so on partly can be very transferable into offshore renewables. So there's a really nice opportunity there to generate extra economic benefit to coastal regions where it's really needed.
Great.
And then I think that another point just on the skills and involvement of society in this exciting new energy generation is in the offshore wind sector. Then they have a target of a third of the workforce being female by 2030, which is a hugely ambitious target. But I think it just shows also there's an opportunity for these new sectors to really set some important and ambitious targets and to change the way we sort of operate traditionally. So
brilliant. I didn't know about that. That's great. Thanks, Deborah. Sam.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on job creation and particularly, picking up a bit more on what's just been said, and particularly picking up on solar. I think there's been something interesting that, at the moment, the UK imports most of solar panels, and essentially most of the jobs here are in installation and deployment. And there's an interesting thing we've seen over the last year or two with the supply chains being so disrupted that we have actually seen a big drop in how much solar is being deployed. There's actually been a blip in this usually exponential trajectory. And I think there's a movement towards bringing in, for example, the silicon wafers and having module assembly done locally in the country. So, for example, in the UK or other countries. And there's also more movement now towards thinking about local manufacturing as well, thinking about manufacturing PV in the UK. And this is also coming on to the new technologies as well. It's an opportunity for the UK to really capitalise on a lot of, in fact, research findings in new PV technologies. There's, for example, these halo perovskites that have come on recently. A lot of that's come up from Oxford, and there's some really exciting developments there. And there's an opportunity to capitalise on that and really set up and establish a lot of the entire supply chain through the UK. That's something quite interesting. I think we may see over the next decade that changing quite a bit.
Thanks. That's great. Thanks, Jonathan. I thought we'd just bring you in very briefly. I know we haven't got an empty seat at the moment, but there was a very direct sort of reference to.
Very briefly, I think I do need to spring to the defence of PV applications, and perhaps pick up on a couple of points you made. One is that actually the cost of modules is now much less significant. It really is the cost of balance of plant. If government policy in the UK has encouraged the solar industry to demonstrate its versatility, and this is interesting, in a role like bioenergy and other choices, some of these technologies prove to be more versatile than at first thought. It has been through the development of an installer network and a supply chain that manages a lot of that balance of plant stuff rather than necessarily just module manufacture. In terms of land use, we've got to be careful here. Generally, our members, farmers, do not want to be dictated to about how they use land. At the end of the day, it's got to be a business-based choice on the part of individual farmers, many of whom are very devoted to food production, but they're looking for diversification opportunities. And the ground rents or the earnings from deploying solar on land, number one, it's actually very efficient use of land compared with deploying very many other technologies. As an academic, I've written about this. You can look at the energy density that you can get per hectare of land with different technologies. Solar actually has a proportionately rather small land take. This is not to say that we're not challenged at the moment, because there is a new raft of American-sized projects coming forward. We've already got there's about 150 mega projects, each of which is about 100 hectares, in the pipeline. Those are going to get built. Most local authorities now have declared climate emergency and seem much more receptive to the idea than might have been the case previously, when there was a tendency to go, not sure that that's a wise use of land. But in the UK, there has been good work that we've done with the trade body Solar Energy UK on multi-purpose use of land, making sure that the land is also deploying agri-environmental measures, the sort of pollen-rich, pollen and nectar-rich mixtures for a variety of pollinators and overwinter birdseed mixtures, which are good for wild birds and small mammals and so on. So you can put that in the curtilage of your solar farm. You can also sheep graze and run poultry. And so there are excellent examples, particularly in the UK, of this kind of multi-purpose use of land. However, as I said, there's a further, one last point, there is this further cohort of American-sized 500 megawatt projects coming forward now. Now, this is driven entirely by cost and economics and the structure of investment. It is a challenge now to see whether Britain actually has the space for projects on that kind of scale, because this is like, you're looking at up to 1,000 hectares at a time in the sort of wide open spaces of Lincolnshire in particular, but there's a big one in North Kent, there's another one near Chelmsford, there's another one to the northeast of Cambridge. So, the jury is still out on that particular point.
Thank you, Jonathan. Right, we need a spare. Thank you, Jonathan, for vacating. Joan, come to you, and then over to you. Make it brief if you can.
Okay. I guess I had 3 points. The first one was distributed manufacture, as you were saying. Perovskites allows you to essentially use locally sourced materials because you don't have to worry about it because they're abundant materials usually. The second one was agrivoltaics and the multi-purposing of land use. I mean, from some of the research I've seen, it appears as though you can use certain types of solar panels and grow crops, either using partial shade or the panels themselves actually filter some of the light, but not all of the light, and that allows certain crops to grow healthily. And I think the third one was land use, and I think that's a really, really big issue, really, with renewables. And I sort of see rooftop PV being actually, although it is more expensive, quite advantageous in the sense that it doesn't actually use space that we otherwise would use. And especially when you start to consider integrated panels, then you start to reduce costs. And I know that drops efficiency, but I feel like we have to move to a more efficient society rather than just thinking that we can build and do whatever we want, wherever we want, because everything has a consequence. Yeah. And so really we need to move to a more efficient society.
Thanks for that. I'm going to move us on in a minute to thinking about the big UK policy systemic picture, and then we're going to kind of finish on that. So please do everybody think about any points you want to make on that big sort of helicopter view of how the UK makes this transition. Andy, you've joined us.
This possibly is a transition point. So just in the discussion around subsidy and whether we should or shouldn't be subsidizing energy or renewables, whatever it may be, probably a pertinent time to remind everyone that we're competing against an industry that is arguably the most heavily subsidized in the world. The IMF report recently about the fossil fuel industry receiving the equivalent of $11 million a minute of subsidy. And that's what you have to compete against. But localized generation and disaggregated energy systems is a really kind of almost rebellious way for us to fight back against that. And you almost remove that power and you remove yourself from contributing to that system. So that's another key benefit for me in terms of generating and consuming as much as possible, as locally as possible. So large-scale wind and PV arrays, relatively locally, that's great for the world, not just for the locals.
Andy, while we've got you, and I'm not asking you to represent the whole of the city of Glasgow just at one moment, but you are here as somebody who works here and is grounded here. One of the questions we haven't really looked at is prioritisation of utilisation of energy in any sectors that are really a critical factor in particularly high energy users. And for you with a sort of city-based view, are there any areas of energy use, before we move on to sort of UK policy and the whole systemic change, any areas of energy use that you really flag up as being the ones we need to tackle the quickest?
I don't think I'm going to say anything controversial or new here, but heat is a problem.
Yeah.
We are really struggling with not just the technologies and how we generate that or create that heat, but also how we get those technologies into where they're required. So, retrofitting is a huge headache. We do need to take a fabric-first approach and improve the condition of the properties in our estates generally in the city. But also, then what? Is that good enough? And this will be controversial, actually. Every sector doesn't have to meet net zero. There are sectors that can subsidize that zero carbon ambition. For me, what's more important is the rate of change. So cumulatively, you can save more carbon without ever reaching net zero because of the persistence of that CO2 in the atmosphere. Saving a ton of carbon now, 2021, is the equivalent of 9 tons of carbon between now and 2030. Saving 1 ton in 2030 only saves 1 ton versus the 9, but we'll still meet that net zero target. So we do need to think about the rate of that transition, and domestic housing in cities may be one of those areas that we forego the net zero with a view that that's going to be almost subsidized by other sectors or emission sources. So I don't think people should get hung up on I must meet net zero. You must contribute and you must do what you can. But
thanks, Henry. Brilliant contribution. I'm going to come to you in a minute, Tony, but Henry joined and then I'll come to you if that's all right. So, Henry.
Yeah, and it is building on your next move to the transition and subsidy. And I think, we are in a sector that is designed around subsidy and driving down the costs. And the two main mechanisms that the policymaker has is technology push and market pull. And the CFD has been incredibly successful at driving down the costs of certain technologies. But you could say, in fact, it's fair to say, that the CFD is a non-progressive policy that does socialise the cost over the entire population, rich or poor. They're all paying the same price there. Technology push is a much more complex and nuanced policy, of which you would say that all of the supergens are focused and funded from a technology push mechanism. And it's a much more progressive policy because it is shared across taxes, so it would be deemed as being more progressive. But it's a much more difficult policy for the policymaker to use because there's many more decisions there. They cannot leave it to the market to decide where the funding needs to go. There needs to be difficult decisions and choices made. You need an intelligent policymaker to make those decisions. And so bringing it back to the subsidy with the jobs that we're speaking about earlier, which leads to then a just transition, is I think, we need a close look at where the jobs are available. Which areas does the UK have a supply chain where we are already leaders, and we need to support and continue to nurture that supply chain so we continue to be leaders in the future. Which are the areas where we've already missed the boat and where somebody else is already much better at it than we are, and there are a number of categories there where it's not worth trying to catch up because that ship has already sailed. And then there is the area where I would consider to be the all to play for category. And there's lots of all to play for categories in the route to net zero where we're perhaps not good at it yet, but neither is anybody else. And so it's an all to play for where we need to make a decision if we really want this or not as an economy in order to make that decision. So I think overall my message is that things need to change in the subsidy and policy market, and its energy policy made difficult is the right thing to do to make it progressive.
Right, thanks, Henry. We can make these fast. Tony, very briefly, and then I'm going to
get coming back on my colleague's point, I do actually agree that subsidies do have a role in terms of creating that supply chain. I think that is really important. I think that also the demonstration of technology and what it can achieve and growing that, I think that is important. The point I was making that there are some unintended consequences, and we all know what they are, that have happened around that. In terms of this kind of what we need to do, so your heat pump, my electric vehicle, that has got an enormous amount of embedded carbon. So we must decarbonize manufacturing. our industries. And that's where a clear focus should be.
Thanks, Tim. Great contribution. I'm going to ask you to leave the circle at that point. Hi, you've joined us. Thanks for joining. Do you want to tell us your name and your thoughts?
My name is Lee from the University of Cambridge. Yeah, so you asked about which sector we can probably target. What are the quick wins? I wanted to say maybe we can look at meat, maybe we can look at the transport industry, but honestly, one thing that we must be careful of is what we call the rebound effect. So the policymakers must consider what we call systems thinking analysis. So in systems thinking, we are basically drawing a diagram. We want to see the impact. There are certain consequences that might not be directly involved when we make a decision. So we must look at all those aspects, the externalities.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant.
I can give an example.
Please do. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So we might say today, okay, we no longer want people to drive into the city as a policy that we put. But we must think of what are the consequences. People are going to have more money, for example, because they're not buying fuel. What are they going to use the money for? Maybe they're going to have more trips for holidays, flying to America, flying to different parts of the world. So that's an indirect consequence of a decision that we make. So it's just a warning as we are going to put forward our
really good point made. Thank you so much for that. Brilliant. Okay, now you two are challenging because you sat down literally at the same time. So I'm going to come to you first, and then that's okay. Do you want to tell us your name?
Sure.
And if you could make it brief, that's all right. Sorry, your name.
Neil Freer from University of Manchester. So I thought it would be quite important to talk about BECCS because it's not been brought up yet. So achieving a net zero by 2050 is going to be extremely challenging without BECCS. You can rely on other forms of CDR or DAX, but BECCS could be predominantly sourced.
And BECCS, for those who don't know, is
bioenergy and carbon capture and storage.
Thanks.
But I think it's quite important to, as was mentioned right at the beginning, to put the right type of BECCS in the right type of location, as be amazed to see if you put the wrong BECCS in the wrong location, the performance of the facility tanks completely. So on average, a lot of my modelling, if you move a BECCS from its optimal location into a moderate location, you're increasing your supply chain emissions from between 500 to 600%. But if you're moving a BECCS facility to its completely wrong location, you're looking at 1,800% increase in your supply chain emissions. And doing BECCS is all about getting a favourable net negative balance, carbon balance. And if you put the wrong type of BECCS into the wrong location, there's no point in doing it at all. And different types of BECCS kind of perform better in different locations. So you get some forms of BECCS which operate optimally within the clusters around the UK, but you also get types of BECCS which operate outside of these clusters as well. So I think a spatial look at what sort of BECCS operates in what sort of location will be critical into net zero.
Thanks. Very good. Your name?
Perfect link. My name is Jane Rickaby, Willow Energy, or we grow willow, SRC perennial energy crops. And I just wanted to fly the bioenergy flag because no one else is. And just, I suppose, a frustration of mine is that bioenergy is kind of almost looked as a secondary to solar and wind, but where it can really play a massive part is in negative emissions or reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So kind of rather looking at biomass as a renewable energy, I think we should be looking at maybe as a greenhouse gas removal technology instead. And then just linking to what you're saying about policy, long-term policy is what we need. I'm sick of these policies based around political cycles, 4 or 5 year cycles. We'll need to be looking at policies that are 10, 15, 20 years, and we stick with them. We don't, every time a new party comes in, it gets chucked out. It's got to be cemented in the industry.
Yeah. If ever we needed long-term thinking, it's this, isn't it? I feel like I've got a bioenergy flash has arrived. Patricia, I'm going to come to you in a minute.
I'm not going to talk about bioenergy.
No, I was going to come to you in a minute, but could I come to you first? And tell us your name, please.
Hello, my name is Ali Hassan and I work at the University of Manchester for the Supergen Energy Networks Hub. I just want to add some points on domestic heating, which is a major contributor to carbon emissions in the UK, but there is still very great uncertainty in the pathways to heat decarbonization, which has strong implications for the energy networks. For example, if we move towards a predominantly electrified heat sector, then the peak electricity demand could almost double by 2050, which means that we have to reinforce the electricity network, which is a cost and time-intensive procedure. And if we move towards hydrogen-based heating solutions, then it would require the repurposing of the gas network, which again is a time and cost-intensive process. So I think we need to plan ahead to enable the transition of our energy networks towards a net zero UK.
Great, thank you so much. Really good contributions. Patricia?
Yeah, I wanted to come in on the wider policy issue. To date, the UK has done the easy stuff because it's not electricity. It's an absolutely regulated market. You have to be registered to supply. So it's fairly easy to put a mandate in place and to say, oh, you know what, you have to make it this percent, you can completely control it. We then tried to do that with fuel a little bit. There's been a bit of success there, and we've tried to do it with heat, but these are fundamentally different because people can choose their mobility source, they can choose how they move around, and they can choose how to heat. And therefore, you just cannot operate with the same mechanisms. We need to be looking, I think, at some very radically different policy mechanisms. And I think one of the things that really annoys me, and I agree with whoever it was earlier talked about standing charges, that drives me mad. But the other thing that drives me mad is the disparity between heat and electricity costs in the UK compared to their carbon emissions. Because when I get my bill, my electricity and heat cost about the same. The carbon, it's all in the heat. It's not in the electricity. So we need to get that reflected properly, and we need to be looking at some very radically different mechanisms here, because it's just not going to work the same way as it did with electricity. Let's wake up and try something different.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tricia. I like that. Sarah, you joined us.
Yes, I just thought on the policy side, it's worth saying something about the industrial end user and the need for transition, subsidy or policy to support big energy users in the industrial sector, like the steel making, glass making, chemical sector, the food sector. Agriculture is an end user, but could also be a carbon sink. But the transition and the policy, some of what we've talked about is really about the domestic and the individual choice. And we all work for someone. And so sometimes when I'm asked what can individuals do, I like to say, go and ask your employer what they're going to do to get to 2050 and how can we support those different industrial sectors and also the public sector and the third sector in moving away from carbon intensive energy.
Thank you. Really good. What can we do? You've joined us again.
Yeah, so I just wanted to come into the point with, we have this target of net zero by 2050. This is a very, the data's there and it's becoming a very pressing issue. And so in terms of energy generation, we really need to, the policies that we're implementing, really need to think about what we can do with the technology that exists now, because we can't necessarily rely on new technologies coming in. And I really wanted to come back to the point that you made earlier about nuclear, because we really haven't talked about that in an energy generation discussion. I feel like people may be thinking, well, why are we not talking about this more? And I think because 2050 is, it's 30 years away, and current nuclear plants take about, let's say, 20 years to build, if we begin today, and then another 10 years to offset the carbon used in the manufacturing. Now, it is a clean energy source, but this is why I think we need to be clear, this is not a main part of our solution to get to net zero by 2050. One alternative to that may be if these modular reactors come in, but once again, how justified can it be relying on this new technology, which may or may not come in within the next 5-10 years? I mean, we know how long we've been waiting for nuclear fusion. So I think when we talk about these modular reactors, whether Rolls-Royce do manage to develop them or not, we need to caveat that with, okay, our main focus is developing renewable energies because we have this technology, and economies of scale mean that this will be developed much faster than nuclear, where you can build one plant at a time and then learn very slowly.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make that point.
Great. I'm really struck by, yes, I thought Beverly might go, oh, no, you're beaten to it, Beverly. That's the dynamics of the fishbowl, unless you rugby tackle somebody. Oh, you're in. Right. Thanks for joining. Right, we've got literally 2 more minutes, so these will almost be our last remarks, I think. So, do you want to tell us your name, where you're from?
I'm Lai Soto. I'm a research associate at the University of Bristol, working on the Supergen Energy Networks Hub. I'd like to link your point with the subsidization, because at the same time as subsidization of fossil fuels and alternatives for providing generation, renewable energy or whatever to the customers must be made available along with the network connecting it. So it might take some time, but still the alternatives must be they must be connected to the end user somehow. They must be connected to the existing energy mix somehow.
Thank you. Beverly, did you have something to say? Somebody's flagged up SMRs. I mean,
no, it was more around the time of. So you know, to get to net zero, there's something like 40% of technologies we don't yet have commercially available yet. And you know, the kind of average length of time, regardless of which industry you look at, for something to commercialize to mass market adoption is about 30 years. So, and that doesn't matter if you're looking at hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, heat pumps, small modular reactors, or whatever it is. That is the kind of time to commercialize a new low carbon technology, and of course that's time we don't have. So I think kind of the challenge really is, right, how do we accelerate that process, which would normally happen by normal market forces through this process called co-evolution, but given that, you know, how do we kind of speed that up so that we do have many more of these technologies that we're all working on in the room, solar, hydrogen, to you know, so that we can actually meet these 2030 and then 2050 targets.
And Beth, on that, because this is virtually our last point, so I want us all to leave with the glass half full. What are the solutions to that speeding up of the deployment? Have you got anything you'd flag up as being great opportunities to speed up the deployment of these new technologies?
I think it's really working in an ecosystem, and what's been fantastic about this is it's been kind of an ecosystem working in action, which has been brilliant. But it's really about bringing the financiers and the IP attorneys and the lawyers and the research community and the government together in, you know, kind of forums like this to be able to understand where a particular barrier or blocker is, and then to be able to work together so that, you know, everything in the system can slot into place, so that you can then successfully commercialize that piece, because that relies on the regulation, you know, that relies on the finance, that relies on the technology actually working, and so to kind of bring all that, you know, together, relies on lots and lots of multifaceted conversations with different stakeholders to actually be able to move things along.
Brilliant, thanks, Beverly. I'm about to wrap us up and say thanks to everybody that's helped make this happen. I'm going to check in with Dan if there's anything I've missed, or if there's anything on the internet that I need to know about.
We have a few questions online. I think we're going to pick one for you, because I'm very aware we don't have too much time. Given the fact that we are here at the United Nations Conference of Parties, and it is an international discussion too in Glasgow, there's a point being made about, given the topic is about a net zero world, what about generation, energy generation in developing countries, and particularly the global south? In terms of the UN responsibility is the same, but differentiated between the global north and the global south, the developed countries. So I think maybe if anyone has any comments or thoughts on how the development missions should help those.
Thanks, Dan. I don't know whether is the audio on over there. was. Yes, that was picked up, that question. That's great. Okay, so we've got one last contribution. Does anybody either here or want to join the circle who'd like to talk about the Global South? That's a really good point that we haven't touched on at all.
I think the key thing is that doing a lot of work in Brazil, for example, and actually you have to understand, and it's the country that needs to be able to determine its energy mix and what it wants to do, rather than kind of people from the developed world going over there saying have one of these and one of those.
Yeah.
The technologies and solutions that work here don't necessarily work in the Global South. And it's not just developed to Global South, it's Global South to Global South communications, which are as, if not more, important in that, in that transition.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Beverly. Final comment from you, John.
Yeah, if I may speak as an honorary African, because, my wife's African, my first wife was also African. So I've got a bit of a perspective. I have worked in a lot of the Global South countries. Scalability, I think, is the answer to scalability and speed of deployment. And so some technologies are more agile and perhaps more applicable in the Global South than others. Solar is already making enormous strides. We're starting to see, for example, I don't know, in urban Nigeria, people are getting fed up with having generator sets as backup electricity supply. They're actually going for solar and battery. Rooftop solar in particular, in Ghana, I could say that it's a lot easier to do commercial and industrial rooftop solar because of the regulatory framework in Ghana at the present time. It's very difficult to become a public electricity supplier. It's very easy if you are Coca-Cola in Accra to say we want rooftop solar because that's going to give us our own independence from the national electricity supply. So, yeah, as I said, I think that's probably the simple answer, the scalability and the rapid deployment capabilities of new technologies.
Great, thank you. Did you want to, one last very quick point? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I do come from one.
Please join this third voice.
Yeah, so I come from sub-Saharan countries. So basically, what we need in those countries, in developing countries, is funding, especially when it comes to solar. There is a huge opportunity because solar is very cheap to maintain. It is also, easy. You don't need special skills to maintain solar, and it works very well. But people there don't have enough funding. So I think the UN or these major countries big countries can actually help in that regard. Solar is a very good source. Of course, in other countries, there is hydro, where they are lucky to have those gorges or rivers, and it's making a very huge contribution in Zimbabwe and Zambia, for example. Yeah, so, but what is funding?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Very last, very brief comment, Sarah.
I was just going to say that this harks back to our very first comment, which is we need local solutions for local places.
Yeah. Thank you. Lovely note to end on. I'm going to wrap this up there, if that's okay. I'm looking at the people kitchens off and make sure they're happy. We've covered a huge amount. We covered some stuff that I expected. I expected people to talk about a wide mix of technologies delivered at the right place at the right time. I expected some of that. But there have been some other great contributions around just transitions, innovating beyond 2030. I think that's what you brought up, actually, Beverly. And the role of people. We actually got to that early in the conversation. I didn't have to prompt it. We started talking about the role of people and more of that, whether it be behaviour change or the democratisation of energy has been a really rich theme that we've been talking about. And those of us who live in leaky teapots need to do something about it. We have touched on nuclear more than once and talked about that. And we also got into a bit of land use and planning and how to use our land, which was a really great topic as well. And we had a bioenergy push right at the end, we noticed. And I think for me, a couple of things really stand out. We've touched time and time again on demand reduction being important, fabric first approach when we think about heat, and I think that came through a number of times. And I loved the all to play for categories, actually, Henry. That was a really lovely point. If we're thinking about the opportunities that come out of all of this, I loved your categorization of where the opportunities lie. And finally, radical new policies, Patricia, needed. We need to have a gear shift in that space clearly. So what an incredibly rich discussion, actually. So thank you all so much. A fishbowl is a slightly unusual format for a debate, but I think a really good number of you took part, and I'm really grateful, actually. Because I'll be honest, it can sometimes not work. So you've done a great job today. I just want to say a couple of thanks before we wrap up. First of all, to the Supergen team who've actually organised today. It's a lot of work, actually, getting a day like today to work. So I think Supergen, and by extension, my colleague Ross, who's been filming us and streaming us, I'd like to say thanks. The COP26 Universities Network has helped make this happen. Strathclyde University, obviously, is hosting us here at the wonderful Ramshorn Theatre. I have to give a last plug to the exhibition outside. Don't dash away to the green zone, but take some time to look at the exhibition here. But then my final thing is actually just to thank all of you for participating so well. I didn't actually have to kick anybody off the blue chair, which shows that we've had a really, really incredibly rich discussion. So thank you so much, everybody, and I hope you enjoy the rest of COP26. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
How do you leave a fishbowl? Tippy toe.